In the summer of 80 AD, Emperor Titus inaugurated the Flavian amphitheater with 100 consecutive days of bloodshed. 9,000 animals were butchered across its sand. Over the centuries that followed, an estimated 400,000 human beings would die within those same walls. Bones unearthed at Ephesus still carry the fracture lines of gladiatorial training and the chemical traces of a fighter's last meal. The remains endured, the names did not, but enough survives to reconstruct one gladiator's day inside that machine, from barracks dawn to arena verdict. 100 days. That was the promise Emperor Titus made to Rome in the summer of 80 AD. 100 days of unbroken spectacle, each dawn bringing fresh blood to the sand. Ancient records tally the cost in numbers that stagger even now. 9,000 wild beasts killed, their bodies dragged from cages below and slaughtered for the crowd's pleasure. The amphitheater itself, newly completed, held as many as 80,000 spectators at a time, packed shoulder to shoulder, waiting for violence to begin. Each day's program demanded dozens of new fighters, drawn from the empire's network of ludi. Gladiators rotated in relentless succession, their lives measured out by the hour, their deaths by the tally. The city's streets ran thick with the traffic of animals, equipment, and men marked for combat. Suetonius and Cassius Dio both recorded the scale, though even their figures may fall short of the true count. The emperor presided from a marble throne, distant and unmoved, as the machinery of entertainment ground on. For every name remembered in stone, hundreds more vanished into the ledger, lost among the thousands who fought and died to keep the promise of 100 days. Dawn in Rome arrives with a grey hush, broken only by the distant clang of a temple bell and the shuffling of feet in the barracks. The city's monuments cast long shadows over the waking streets, but inside the walls of the Ludus Magnus there is no grandeur, only the scrape of straw against stone as men rise from their beds. Here, the individual is stripped of name and past. The imperial edict demands bodies, not biographies. Each gladiator is counted, inspected, and assigned like livestock. Ledgers record the intake, not the identity. The emperor's treasury funds their upkeep. Grain for porridge, oil for wounds, iron for shackles. Suetonius writes of the crowds, of the emperor's gaze. But the fighter remains unseen, a number in a column, a cost to be balanced against the spectacle's needs. In the dormitory, men dress in silence, fastening the same rough subligacula, tightening the same leather straps. The world narrows to the barracks' stone walls. Outside, Rome moves as a single mass, but within, the day belongs to the anonymous, the expendable. No monument records the dawn routines of these men. Their names dissolve into the machinery of empire, swept forward into the day's demands. Barley gruel, thick and bland, filled the wooden bowls of the Ludus Magnus at first light. The morning ration was no accident of poverty or neglect. Forensic teams at Ephesus, sifting through the bones of dozens of dead gladiators, found the proof in carbon signatures and mineral traces. The bones themselves, excavated in 1993 and later subjected to isotopic analysis, revealed a diet dominated by C3 cereals, primarily barley and wheat. The Delta 13C values, averaging -23 per ml, pointed to a regimen that was almost vegetarian by design. Animal protein was rare, reserved for the occasional feast or medical recovery. Instead, the daily fare was a porridge known as pulse, sometimes thickened with beans or lentils, and washed down with a curious drink, a suspension of burned bone ash mixed into water. This bone ash beverage, noted in the elevated strontium to calcium ratios of the Ephesus skeletons, provided a steady dose of calcium and phosphorus, buffering the body against the constant threat of fracture. The Roman term for these fighters, hordearii, or barley men, was not a slur but a clinical description. Barley's slow-burning starches gave muscles the endurance to withstand hours of drills and the shock of sudden wounds. The morning bowl, roughly 400 calories, was calculated to fuel not just survival but recovery. The porridge stuck to the gut, releasing energy as the hours dragged on. Cheese and dried figs, sometimes added for variety, offered little relief from monotony, but contributed essential salts lost to sweat. A cup of watered wine, more electrolyte than indulgence, completed the meal. This diet was not a matter of taste. In the arena, a body built on barley could absorb punishment and heal bone. The calcium-rich ash, identified in trace element profiles from Ephesus, hardened the skeleton against the repeated blows of wooden swords and iron weights. Every mouthful was a form of preparation, a chemical shield against the violence that defined the day. The taste of ash lingered on the tongue, a daily reminder that the line between nourishment and survival was thin, and that even in the refectory, the body was being shaped for sacrifice. The names of those who ate this breakfast are lost, but the evidence remains, inscribed in the marrow of their bones. The clang of iron on stone signaled the start of morning drills. In the heart of the Ludus Magnus, the Lannister's voice cut through the courtyard, barking orders with the same finality as a sentence. The men formed lines on the sand, each step measured, each movement watched. The architectural remains of the training yard, its sippy and scored paving, still bear the imprint of relentless repetition. Calisthenics came first, a barrage of running, jumping and rope climbing that left sweat pooling at the edges of leather sandals. The sand beneath their feet was not for comfort, but to prevent slipping and to cushion the inevitable falls. After the warm-up, the real work began. Wooden swords called rudies were handed out, heavier than the iron blades used in the arena. Each swing built muscle, each parry left splinters in the palm. The Lannister moved among the ranks, cane in hand, correcting a stance or striking a back to keep the rhythm unbroken. Partner drills forced men to face each other, 3 minutes of thrusts and blocks, followed by 2 minutes of gasping rest. The pace never slackened. The ledgers found in the ruins record the cost of this discipline: broken bones, dislocated shoulders and fingers fused by repeated fracture. Osteological studies at Ephesus show humeri thickened by stress, lesions etched deep in the bone, a tally of every blow that missed its mark. Psychological control was as important as strength. The threat of punishment hung over every mistake. A dropped shield brought public humiliation, sometimes worse. The Lannister's authority was absolute. Even names were erased. New arrivals lost their birth names, replaced by a gladiatorial moniker: Flamma, Crixus, Victor, chosen for effect, not heritage. Tombstones across the empire pair these stage names with brief, impersonal records. Victories counted, deaths unmentioned, origins forgotten. The ritual of renaming was not a ceremony, but an act of erasure, branding the fighter as property and spectacle. The courtyard echoed with the rhythm of drills, but the ledger remained silent on the cost to the mind. When the signal sounded for the next phase, the fighters moved as one, bodies honed and identities stripped, ready for the march that would carry them toward the arena and the waiting crowd. The call to march came without ceremony, just a curt order from the calator and the rattle of iron keys. The men filed out of the Ludus Magnus in silence, each step echoing against the stone. Ahead stretched the cryptoporticus, a covered corridor carved beneath the street, its arched ceiling pressed low overhead. This passage, built by imperial decree, measured barely 2 meters wide and ran for nearly 60 meters, a stone artery linking the barracks to the eastern threshold of the Colosseum. Archaeological surveys record the corridor's dimensions in cold numbers, but the lived experience was measured in breath and heartbeat. The air inside was thick, stale with the sweat and fear of hundreds who had walked it before. Each footfall set dust swirling in the shafts of half-light that leaked from grated openings above. The collator walked at the head, a staff of office in hand, his authority absolute within these walls. He set the pace, steady, unhurried, indifferent to the anxiety that pressed in from behind. The cryptoporticus was not a passage for spectacle. Its function was containment, both of bodies and of fate. Here, the world narrowed to stone and shadow. The only sounds were the shuffle of sandals, the scrape of armor, and the distant rumble from the amphitheater above, where 80,000 voices waited for the day's blood. There was no view of the sky, no sense of Rome's grandeur. The corridor bent slightly, forcing the line of fighters to move single file. Inscriptions scratched into the plaster, names, curses, prayers, hinted at those who had passed before, but most marks had faded to illegibility. The Coletor's authority was reinforced by the corridor's design: one way forward, no room to turn back. At the far end, a heavy wooden door barred the final threshold. Beyond it lay the arena floor, the sand, and the crowd's judgment. But in the crypta porticus, the only certainty was the press of bodies, the taste of fear, and the knowledge that, for many, this would be the last journey their names would ever take. 50,000 voices, tiered in stone, pressed inward from every side of the Colosseum. The amphitheater's architecture enforced a separation as absolute as any iron gate. Spectators flowed through the vomitoria, arched passageways engineered to swallow and release the masses with mechanical precision. Each entrance led to a prescribed sector, marked by rank and privilege. Senators in the marble front rows, women and the poor relegated to the upper shadows. The arena floor, a bare ellipse of sand, lay sunken and isolated, its perimeter ringed by a podium wall high enough to block escape but low enough to offer the crowd an unobstructed view of death. For the gladiator, the boundary was more than physical. Two gates defined the fate of every fighter. The Porta Sana Vivaria, the so-called Gate of the Living, stood at the northern end, rarely marked by inscription, but spoken of in Martial's epigrams as the passage for survivors. Its twin, the Porta Libitinaria, loomed on the southern side, the Gate of the Dead, named for the goddess of funerals. Archaeological surveys have traced its route from the arena to the mortuary corridor, where bodies were stripped and tallied before burial. Inscribed stone fragments bearing the letters LIB confirm its grim purpose. The machinery of crowd control was relentless. Lanciarii and vigiles, armed guards, patrolled the corridors, ensuring that no spectator crossed into the fighter's domain. The gladiators themselves entered not with the imperial pompa, but through a guarded vomitorium, herded in silence beneath the roar above. The separation was total. The crowd demanded spectacle, but the men who supplied it remained invisible until the moment they stepped onto the sand. For most, the only exit would be through the southern gate, their names unrecorded, their bodies fed into the endless cycle that kept the amphitheater's promise of blood. The architecture did not merely contain violence, it choreographed the final march of anonymity. Steel clashed with flesh beneath the noon sun, the arena sand already stained from the morning's slaughter. Pairings were never random. A murmillo, weighed down by a crested helmet and broad shield, faced the agile retiarius, armed with trident and net. This was a contest by design, matching brute force against speed, muscle against nerve. The Zliten mosaic, unearthed in Libya, preserves the moment, the retiarius circling, net poised, while the murmillo advances, shield angled, blade ready. Each movement echoed centuries of tactical logic, refined by the Lannistae and enforced by the editor's rules. The crowd's roar was not a distant backdrop. It was a force that pressed in, demanding spectacle and verdict. Martial's epigrams and the forensic data from Pollentia agree. The most common wounds fell on the shield arm and skull, evidence of repeated, targeted blows. In the stands, senators and plebeians alike watched for the referee, the summa rudis, who alone could halt the violence. His staff, raised or lowered, signaled the moment of judgment. A missed call meant chaos. A delayed gesture, another body on the sand. The fate of a fallen fighter hung on a single gesture. Juvenal's lines describe the police verso, the ambiguous turn of the thumb. Modern scholars debate its meaning, but the effect was clear. The crowd's will, translated through the referee, decided who lived and who died. Some mosaics show the thumb pressed down, others turned to the side. The verdict was public, irreversible, and often fatal. Osteological surveys at Ephesus catalogue sharp force trauma, deep cuts to bone, punctures from tridents, and the unmistakable marks of execution. 1 in 5 skeletons bears evidence of a coup de grace, a blade driven through the base of the skull, ending the contest with clinical finality. The referee's authority was absolute in that suspended moment. He read the crowd, watched for the editor's nod, and gave the signal. For the victor, the north gate beckoned, a palm, a purse, perhaps another day. For the defeated, the southern passage awaited, the porta libitinaria and the silent work of the mortuary slaves. The crowd's judgment was swift. The names of the fallen rarely survived the afternoon. The sand was raked smooth, the next pair summoned, and the cycle began again. The aftermath of combat in the Colosseum began not with applause, but with calculation. As the crowd's roar faded, the work of the doctores, arena surgeons, took over. They moved quickly across the sand, searching for signs of life among the fallen. Wounds were inspected, bodies triaged. Some men were carried on stretchers to the shadowed infirmary beneath the southern stands, where the air hung thick with the smell of vinegar and blood. Others, judged beyond saving, were dispatched with a final blade thrust at the base of the skull, a coup de grace that left little room for mercy or error. The sand was raked clean, the next pair summoned, and the cost of each fight entered into the ledgers kept by the arena's scribes. For the empire, death was a number to be balanced. The inaugural games of 80 AD demanded a ceaseless supply of bodies. Records suggest as many as 34 bouts in a single day, each requiring 2 fresh fighters. Over 100 days, the arithmetic grows monstrous. Modern estimates, drawn from epigraphic tallies and demographic models, point to a death toll that may have reached 400,000 across centuries of Roman spectacle. Yet even the best supported calculations, like Donald Kyle's range of 30 to 100,000, admit a vast darkness, thousands of names and stories lost, erased by the routine of the games. The survivors faced their own reckoning. Recovery was crude but systematic. Linen bandages soaked in vinegar, cauterization for deep cuts, poultices of herbs and ash pressed into open wounds. Recovery was uncertain. Some wounds healed into twisted scars, others into lifelong disability. The doctores recorded injuries in daily logs, but rarely the names attached to them. Gladiators who survived their allotted number of bouts, sometimes as few as 3, more often a dozen or more, could be offered the wooden sword of freedom, the ludus. Most never lived long enough to claim it. A rare exception survives in stone. The tombstone of Flamma, discovered in Sicily, tells the story of a man who fought 34 times, won 21, and was offered freedom 4 times, each time refusing, returning instead to the sand. His epitaph is brief, stripped of sentiment. Flamma, Syrian by birth, lived 30 years, fought 34 times, victor 21. No mention of family, only the record of combat. Flamma's name endures, but for every stone like his, there are hundreds of graves unmarked, bones mingled in mass pits outside the city walls. The ledgers of the games preserved only what the empire valued: numbers fought, numbers won, numbers lost. The rest dissolved into silence. The sand of the arena was raked clean each evening, the names of the dead washed away with the blood. In the end, the cost of the games was not just measured in bodies, but in the erasure of identity. Thousands reduced to statistics, remembered only as a line in a ledger or a faded inscription on a stone. Beneath the Colosseum's stone, archaeologists uncover shattered bones, evidence of men who fought, died, and vanished without record. In Rome's soil, more than 80 known gladiator graves bear numbers, not names. Their stories dissolve with each passing century, yet the spectacle endures. The world still remembers the games, but the fighters remain anonymous, sacrificed to memory as much as to the sword.